She fled, carrying in her womb the duchy's most dangerous secret, but destiny had other plans when a wounded soldier arrived at her refuge. Have you ever wondered what price a woman pays for loving where she shouldn't? What happens when a noble family's honor trembles because of a heart that chose wrongly? From whatever corner of Latin America you accompany us, I invite you to discover a story where love defies the laws of lineage and where a bastard proved that blood doesn't determine the worth of a soul. The fields of Andalusia swayed under the cold dawn breeze when Esperanza de Mendoza y Herrera undertook the most desperate flight of her life. The modest carriage, without shields or golden ornaments, advanced along dusty paths while she pressed against her chest a bundle with her only belongings, a miniature of her mother, some silver coins, and the letters she should never have written. At 22, Esperanza bore on her face the unmistakable mark of the Mendozas, emerald green eyes and the proud forehead that characterized her lineage. But she also carried the most painful mark of all. She was the bastard daughter of Duke Don Rodrigo de Mendoza, fruit of his love affair with a lady's companion who died in childbirth. The Duke, a man of rigid honor and unbreakable traditions, had raised her in an ambiguous position. She wasn't a servant, but neither was she legitimate nobility. She lived in the ducal palace like a golden shadow, educated in arts and letters, but always remembering her place one step below her legitimate half-brothers. For years, Esperanza had accepted that destiny with the resignation of one born understanding the world's rules. She walked through marble halls with the elegance inherited from her father, but kept her eyes lowered when important visitors appeared. She spoke French and Italian, played the harpsichord masterfully, and embroidered with the perfection of a nun, but her name never appeared in Madrid's social chronicles. Everything changed when Don Fernando de Vázquez y Salinas, Count of Monterreal, arrived as a guest of the duchy during the feast of St. John. He was a 30-year-old man, a widower, with jet-black hair and a smile that promised secrets. He had come with the intention of courting Doña Isabel, the Duke's legitimate daughter, a blonde and delicate young woman who represented everything Esperanza could never be. But the heart's plans rarely coincide with social protocols. The first time Fernando laid eyes on Esperanza, she was reading under the fig tree in the inner courtyard, with a ray of sun filtering through the leaves and drawing golden reflections in her chestnut hair. She wore a simple blue linen dress without embroidery or lace, but her posture was so natural and elegant that the Count stopped as if he had seen an apparition. "And what do you plan to do now?" he asked, approaching slowly. "I don't know," she confessed with brutal honesty. "Find a place where nobody knows me, pretend I'm a widow, raise my child as I can. I have no plan other than surviving day by day." Alejandro sat before her, took her hands in his, and looked directly into her eyes. "Marry me," he said with a simplicity that cut off Esperanza's breath. "What? You heard me. Marry me. Alejandro, you don't understand. I'm pregnant with another man's child. I'm a bastard without dowry, a fugitive. You are a brave woman who saved my life, who restored my will to live, who taught me that the heart can choose against all social conventions." His voice became firmer. "And as for that child, he will be my son from the moment he's born. He will know no other paternity than mine." "You can't be serious," murmured Esperanza, feeling the world spinning around her. "I've never been more serious in my life." "Esperanza, I was also fleeing from an imposed destiny, from a loveless marriage, from an empty life fulfilling others' expectations. You have shown me that another possibility exists. But society can go to hell," he interrupted vehemently. "I have my own lands in Extremadura, far from courts and salons. There we can live in peace, raise our children, be happy without asking anyone's permission." Tears flowed freely down Esperanza's cheeks. It was too beautiful to be real, too perfect to be possible. "Why would you do this for me?" she whispered. "Because I love you," he replied with a smile. Because from the moment I opened my eyes in that bed and saw you caring for me like an angel, I knew my life had found its purpose. Because I prefer one day of truth with you to an eternity of convenient lies. That night, under the stars of Castile that shone like silent blessings, Esperanza de Mendoza y Herrera accepted the most unexpected proposal of her life. There would be no grand ceremony, no dowry or matrimonial contracts. Only two wounded souls who had decided to heal together. They married the following week in the small church of the nearest village. Remedios and Soledad were their only witnesses. Esperanza wore a simple white linen dress and a crown of wildflowers that Soledad had woven. Alejandro wore his military uniform, but without the decorations that spoke of his noble past. When the priest pronounced the words that united them forever, both felt that a new life was beginning, not only for them, but for the child growing in Esperanza's womb. Alejandro's lands extended over the gentle hills of Extremadura like a green promise under the infinite sky. The Nueva Esperanza, New Hope Estate, a name he had chosen in honor of his wife, wasn't a palace, but it had the warmth of homes built with love instead of vanity. The main house, with whitewashed walls and red tile roofs, rose among centennial olive trees and wheat fields that undulated in the wind like a golden sea. There were stables for horses, corrals for livestock, a small family chapel, and most importantly, for Esperanza, a library that Alejandro had been filling over the years with books brought from his travels. When they arrived in mid-November, the estate workers received them with curiosity, but without hostility. Alejandro had sent ahead a message explaining that he was returning married to a lady of noble birth who preferred the simple life of the countryside to court luxuries. "It's important that nobody knows the complete truth about your past," he had explained during the journey. "Here you will be Doña Esperanza de Mendoza, my legitimate wife, period. The child will be our first son, conceived during our honeymoon in Andalusia." Esperanza had nodded, understanding the necessity of that pious fiction. In a society that didn't forgive feminine transgressions, a well-constructed lie was better protection than the noblest truth. The first months were of mutual adaptation. Esperanza learned to manage a large house, supervise servants, keep the estate's accounts. Alejandro discovered that his wife had a natural talent for numbers and an intuitive understanding of agriculture that surprised even the most experienced workers. "How do you know we should rotate crops that way?" he asked her one afternoon while they reviewed plans for spring planting. "I read about it in a French treatise," she responded naturally. Traditional methods aren't always the most efficient. Little by little, Esperanza won the respect and affection of the estate's inhabitants. She wasn't a haughty lady giving orders from a distance. She worked alongside the women in food preservation, helped in kitchens during major tasks, personally cared for the sick and wounded. Her pregnancy proceeded without complications. Alejandro treated her with a delicacy that bordered on adoration, ensuring she lacked nothing, protecting her from any excessive effort, talking to the child at night as if he had already been born. "What will you be like, little one?" he would whisper, with his head resting on Esperanza's belly. "Will you have your mother's green eyes, or will you be dark like your father?" Esperanza knew he was referring to himself, not Fernando. In Alejandro's mind and heart, that child was his from before birth. Little Diego was born on a March night, when almond trees were blooming and the air carried promises of spring. It was a difficult birth that lasted almost 18 hours, attended by the village midwife and Soledad, who had come from the inn to help her former guest. When the baby's cry finally resounded in the room, Alejandro entered with tears in his eyes to meet his son. Diego was a small but strong child, with dark hair and gray eyes that would change color in the following weeks. "Do you see any resemblance to his true father?" asked Esperanza with a weak but worried voice. Alejandro took the baby in his arms and observed him at length. "I see a beautiful child who will be my son in everything that matters," he finally replied. "Physical resemblance is the least important thing, Esperanza. This child will carry my surname, inherit my lands, and grow up knowing he is loved unconditionally." And so it was. Diego grew up at the Nueva Esperanza estate as Alejandro Mendoza's legitimate heir. He was an intelligent and curious child who learned to read before age 5 and showed early fascination with history and geography books. When he turned 7, more children came to the marriage. First, Alejandra, a girl with golden hair and sweet temperament. Then the twins Carlos and Miguel, so alike that only their mother could distinguish them. Finally, when Esperanza had already turned 35, little Isabel arrived, who would be the light of the whole family's eyes. The years passed like pages of a well-written book. The estate prospered under the joint administration of Alejandro and Esperanza. He handled technical and commercial aspects. She had revolutionized cultivation methods and established a small school for the workers' children. "Don't you find it strange that a woman teaches children to read?" the village priest once asked her. "I find it strange that all women who know how to do it don't," replied Esperanza, with the diplomacy she had learned in her previous life. The tranquility of their new existence was only occasionally disturbed by news from the outside world. They knew that Fernando had been widowed and remarried. They also learned that Duke Don Rodrigo had died without ever finding his bastard daughter, taking the secret of her whereabouts to the grave. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Alejandro asked when the news arrived. "I feel sorry for the man he could have been and wasn't," she replied. "But I don't regret our separation. He gave me life, but you gave me the meaning of living it." Diego, who was then 12 years old, had grown up as a young provincial noble. He knew how to ride, handle a sword, keep the estate's accounts, and behave with courtesy. But he had also inherited his mother's intellectual curiosity and his adoptive father's moral rectitude. One afternoon, while helping Esperanza in the library, he asked a question she had feared for years. "Mother, why don't I have portraits of my paternal grandparents?" Esperanza felt her throat go dry. They had prepared answers for that question, but facing it in reality was different. "Because your father prefers to look toward the future, not the past," she replied carefully. "The portraits are stored away until you're older." Diego nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. But Esperanza noticed a small shadow of doubt in his eyes, the same alert intelligence he had inherited from her that would inevitably lead him to ask more questions. That night, while Alejandro and she prepared for sleep, they shared their fears. "Someday he'll want to know the truth," he said, "and we'll have to decide what to tell him. When that moment comes, we'll tell him everything," replied Esperanza with determination. "We'll tell him he was conceived in error, but raised in love, that his blood may come from nobles, but his character comes from the decisions he has made every day of his life. And if he doesn't understand, if he rejects us for having lied to him, then we will have failed as parents," she murmured. "But I don't think that will happen. Diego has a good heart. He'll understand we did what we thought best for him." The peace of Nueva Esperanza was threatened 16 years after the marriage, when Diego turned 18 and was preparing to assume greater responsibilities in the estate's administration. It all began with the arrival of an unexpected visitor. He was a man of about 50 years, elegantly dressed, who introduced himself as Don Sebastián de Vázquez y Salinas, younger brother of the Count of Monterreal. Esperanza felt her blood freeze when she heard that surname. Alejandro, who had gone out to receive the guest according to hospitality customs, immediately noticed his wife's paleness. "Are you feeling well, Doña Esperanza?" asked Don Sebastián courteously, but also with a penetrating gaze that seemed to seek something specific in her face. "Perfectly," she replied with a controlled voice. "It's just the day's heat. To what do we owe the honor of your visit?" "I come following the trail of an old story," explained the visitor while accepting the wine they offered. "My brother Fernando, may he rest in peace, charged me before dying to search for a woman he knew years ago, a lady of great beauty and education who mysteriously disappeared from Andalusia. Esperanza's heart beat so loudly she feared it could be heard throughout the room. "And what makes you think we could help you with that search?" asked Alejandro with apparent calm. "Well, you see, my brother described that lady to me in great detail. Chestnut hair, eyes green as emeralds, noble bearing. And upon seeing Doña Esperanza, I couldn't help but notice certain similarities." Coincidences exist," murmured Esperanza. "There must be many women with those characteristics." "Certainly," nodded Don Sebastian, "but few with the particular elegance of the Mendozas. My brother always said that lady had something in her way of speaking, of moving, that distinguished her as a member of high nobility." There was a tense silence. Alejandro and Esperanza exchanged quick glances. "May I ask why you seek this woman after so many years?" asked Alejandro. "My brother died recently without direct heirs," explained Don Sebastian. "His second wife also passed away, and before dying, Fernando confessed to me that he had truly loved only one woman in his life, that Andalusian lady who disappeared. He asked me to find her and, if she had borne him a child, to recognize him and give him his place in the family." Esperanza felt the world crumbling around her. After 18 years of peace, the past was returning to claim what it considered its own. "It's a moving story," she managed to say, "but I'm afraid we can't help you. My wife is from a Mendoza family of Extremadura, with no connection to Andalusia." "Of course," smiled Don Sebastian, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Would it be too much trouble to meet your children? I've been told you have several." "Our children are busy with their studies," intervened Esperanza quickly. "Perhaps another time. Please, I insist. A traveler feels honored to meet the next generation of such a respectable family." There was no polite way to refuse without arousing more suspicion. Alejandro called the servants to bring the young people. When Diego entered the salon with his brothers, Don Sebastian remained motionless. The 18-year-old youth was tall and elegant, with dark hair and features that, although tempered by years and maternal inheritance, maintained an undeniable similarity to the Vasquez y Salinas. "A very handsome young man," commented Don Sebastian, without taking his eyes off him. "How old are you?" 18, replied Diego courteously. "Are you from Madrid, sir?" "From Salamanca, mainly, although I travel much on family business." He made a significant pause. "Would you be interested in knowing the world beyond Extremadura, young man?" Diego looked at his parents before answering. "I would be content to administer well the lands I will inherit and serve my family and my people." "A very noble answer," murmured Don Sebastian. "Very noble indeed." That night, after the visitor retired to the room they had prepared for him, Alejandro and Esperanza had the most difficult conversation of their marriage. "He knows," said Esperanza without preamble. "He recognized Diego." "It's possible," admitted Alejandro. "The question is, what does he plan to do with that information? He wants to take him away. He wants to give him the Vasquez surname and make him heir to the county." "That will never happen," declared Alejandro firmly. "Diego is my son, bears my surname, will inherit my lands. Nobody can change that." "Alejandro, you don't understand. If Fernando really charged his brother to search for Diego, if there are wills, legal documents, they could have rights. What rights can a dead man have over a son he never recognized when he was alive?" "The rights that blood and nobility give him," replied Esperanza bitterly. "I've seen what a powerful family can do when they want something. They could take Diego by force, claiming we're depriving him of his true destiny." Alejandro paced the room like a caged animal. "Then we'll leave," he decided suddenly. "We'll sell the estate, take the children and go to the Americas. There nobody knows us, nobody can claim anything, and condemn our other children to a life of exile to protect one. Force Diego to flee without understanding why. It was a dilemma without easy solution. Whatever path they chose would have terrible consequences. We have to talk to Diego," said Esperanza finally. "He has the right to know the truth and choose his own destiny." "Not yet," opposed Alejandro. "First, let's find out what exactly Don Sebastian wants. Perhaps we can reach some agreement." But Don Sebastian hadn't come to negotiate. The next day, he requested a private interview with Diego, claiming he had an educational proposal that might interest a young man of his talent. "My family has connections in the best universities of Spain and Europe," he explained to the boy. "A young man with your intelligence shouldn't waste his potential on a provincial estate, however prosperous it may be." Diego listened courteously, but showed no particular enthusiasm. "I appreciate your interest, sir, but my place is here with my family." "Your family?" repeated Don Sebastian with a strange tone. "Tell me, Diego, haven't you ever noticed you don't look much like your father?" "Physical resemblance isn't everything," replied Diego with some coldness. "My father has taught me everything important: honor, work, respect for others." "Without doubt. But aren't you curious to know, let's say, other facets of your heritage?" Diego frowned. "I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to." Don Sebastian leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I mean that perhaps your true destiny isn't to be a provincial gentleman, but something much more elevated." "Sir," said Diego, standing up, "I think this conversation has gone too far. I would appreciate if you didn't question my family's legitimacy." "I question nothing, young man. I only suggest there are truths you deserve to know." That night, Diego went to find his parents. He found them in the library, talking in low voices with worried expressions. "Is there something I should know about Don Sebastian?" he asked directly. Esperanza and Alejandro looked at each other. The moment they had feared for years had arrived. "Sit down, son," said Alejandro with a grave voice. "It's time you had a man-to-man conversation." And so, in the tranquility of the library, where Diego had learned to read, where he had spent so many happy hours with his mother, his parents told him the truth about his origin. They spoke to him about the forbidden love between a ducal bastard and a marriageable count. They told him about the flight, the meeting at the inn, the decision to build a new life together. They explained why they had lied, why they had invented a different story. Diego listened to them in silence, without interrupting, without asking questions. When they finished, he remained quiet for a long time. "So, Fernando de Vasquez was my biological father?" he finally asked. "Yes," admitted Esperanza. "But Alejandro is my father in everything that matters," interrupted Diego. "That hasn't changed." He paused. "And Don Sebastian wants to take me with him." "It's possible," replied Alejandro. "He could offer you a title, riches, a place in high nobility. And what do you want me to do?" Esperanza felt tears in her eyes. "We want you to be happy, son, to choose the path that fills your soul, not what others expect of you." Diego got up and walked to the window overlooking the golden fields of the estate. For 18 years, those had been his world, his home, his future. "Tomorrow I'll speak with Don Sebastian," he decided, "and I'll give him my answer." The next day's dawn arrived, charged with tension. The whole family knew that the words exchanged that morning could forever change the course of their lives. Diego had spent the night awake, walking through the house corridors, reflecting in the gardens, reviewing every memory of his childhood and adolescence. At dawn, his decision was made. Don Sebastian waited for him in the main salon, elegantly dressed and with a confident smile that suggested he didn't doubt the conversation's outcome. "Good morning, Diego," he greeted cordially. "Have you reflected on what we discussed yesterday?" "Yes, sir, and I've also had a very revealing conversation with my parents." Don Sebastian's smile widened. "Ah, so you already know the truth about your origin. Excellent. That will make things much easier." "What things exactly?" asked Diego with a serene voice. "Well, the arrangements for your new life, of course. I have prepared a private tutor who will bring you up to date on history, protocol, and administration of great patrimonies. Afterward, you'll study in Salamanca, or, if you prefer, in Paris. When you turn 21, you'll formally take possession of the county of Monterreal. And my parents, my brothers." Don Sebastian made a dismissive gesture. "Naturally, they'll be compensated for the care they've provided you. Don Alejandro will receive a generous sum for your upbringing expenses. As for your half-brothers, they can maintain their current life. There's no reason your social ascension should affect them." Diego felt a cold anger growing in his chest, but maintained his composure. "I see. And what happens if I don't accept that proposal?" For the first time, Don Sebastian's expression hardened. "It would be unfortunate. You see, I have in my possession certain documents that my brother Fernando left before dying. Love letters addressed to your mother, stated in the weeks when you were conceived. I also have the sworn testimony of several palace servants who confirm the relationship between Fernando and the Duke's bastard. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you an opportunity. You can come with me willingly, as the legitimate heir you are, or I can make those documents public. Do you know what would happen then?" Diego remained silent, but his jaw tensed. "Your mother would be exposed as the adventuress who seduced a married count. Don Alejandro would be ridiculed as the cuckold who raised another man's bastard. The whole family would be pointed at, despised. Your little brothers would grow up under the scandal's shadow. While if you accept, those documents will remain private. Your mother will keep her reputation as a respectable wife. Don Alejandro will be remembered as the generous gentleman who gave you provisional education until you could claim your true place." At that moment, Alejandro and Esperanza entered. They had heard the conversation from the hallway and could no longer stay on the sidelines. "Enough," said Alejandro with an iron voice. "I won't allow you to blackmail my son." "Your son?" mocked Don Sebastian. "Sir, you may have raised the boy, but blood is blood. Diego is a Vasquez y Salinas, not a second-class Mendoza." "Blood," repeated Diego slowly, "is just colored water that runs through veins. What makes a man isn't where he comes from, but where he's going." He turned toward Don Sebastian with an expression that radiated a maturity he hadn't had the day before. "Sir, I have carefully reflected on your proposal, and my answer is no." "No?" Don Sebastian couldn't believe what he was hearing. "No, I won't go with you. I won't claim the county of Monterreal. I won't change my surname or my life. But the title, the riches, the power, they don't interest me. I have a family that loves me, lands that will soon be mine by right, and a life built on solid foundations. Why would I change that for a stranger's promises?" "Because it's your destiny," exclaimed Don Sebastian, losing his composure. "Because you have noble blood. Because you can be a count." "I can be many things," replied Diego calmly. "But I choose to be the son of Alejandro Mendoza, the brother of Alejandra, Carlos, Miguel, and Isabel, and the future lord of this estate. It's the only nobility that interests me." Don Sebastian stood up abruptly. "You're a fool. You reject the opportunity of your life for peasant sentimentalism. I reject living a life I didn't choose for myself." "Very well," growled Don Sebastian. "But remember, I warned you. I'll make those documents public. The scandal will ruin your family." "Do it," said Diego serenely. "Let the whole world know that my mother had the courage to flee an empty life to build one full of love. Let them know that my father had the nobility to love a wounded woman and raise another man's child as his own. If that's scandal, I prefer scandal to hypocrisy." Esperanza approached her son and took his hand. "Diego, you don't have to protect us at the cost of your future." "Mother," he replied with a smile, "my future is here, with you. It always has been." Don Sebastian looked at the three of them with a mixture of contempt and incredulity. "You're all crazy," he murmured. "Rejecting a county for this." "For love," corrected Alejandro. "We reject a title in exchange for love, and I don't regret that transaction." Don Sebastian left that same morning, taking his threats and documents. He fulfilled his promise. He circulated rumors about Diego's true origin and the story of the Count of Monterreal with the Duke's bastard. For some weeks, the family lived under the pressure of murmurs and malicious comments from some neighbors. But soon, they discovered their reputation was more solid than they had imagined. The estate workers, who had seen Diego grow up and knew his character, weren't influenced by the gossip. The region's merchants and landowners, who had done honest business with Alejandro for years, didn't change their treatment either. "You know what, Don Alejandro?" the mayor of the nearest town told him one day. "A man proves himself through his actions, not rumors. And you have proven for 20 years to be a man of honor. No gossip can erase that." The scandal faded as quickly as it had emerged. Life continued its normal course, but with one important difference. There were no longer secrets in the family. Diego's younger brothers now knew the whole story, and far from distancing themselves from him, they admired him even more for having chosen to stay with them. "You could have been a count," little Isabel told him one afternoon, "but you preferred to be our brother." "I didn't prefer to be your brother," Diego replied, stroking her hair. "I've always been your brother. I just had to remind some people of that." The years that followed the incident with Don Sebastián were the most prosperous in the history of Nueva Esperanza. It was as if the family, strengthened by the test they had overcome together, had found new energy to build their future. Diego became an exceptional administrator. Combining the refined education he had received from Esperanza with the practical knowledge Alejandro had transmitted to him, he implemented improvements that revolutionized the estate's productivity. He introduced new cultivation methods he had studied in French and Italian treatises, built a more efficient irrigation system, and established direct commercial relationships with Madrid and Seville markets. But perhaps his greatest innovation was the school he established on the estate, not only for workers' children, but for young people from the entire region who wanted to learn to read, write, and calculate. Esperanza became the natural director of this institution, sharing her love of knowledge with a new generation. "Don't you think it's dangerous to educate common people too much?" a visitor from Madrid once asked him, a banker who had come to negotiate loans for the estate's expansion. "I think it's dangerous not to educate them," Diego replied firmly. "A peasant who knows how to read can learn better cultivation techniques. An artisan who knows how to calculate can better manage his resources. An educated society is a prosperous society." These ideas, considered revolutionary at that time, brought visitors from all over Spain and even abroad to Nueva Esperanza. Scholars, social reformers, and enlightened nobles came to observe what they called the Extremaduran experiment. Among these visitors came, in the summer when Diego turned 25, a young woman who would forever change the course of his life. Her name was Catalina Ruiz de Alarcón, daughter of an enriched merchant from Cadiz who had made his fortune in trade with the Americas. She wasn't noble by birth, but her father had bought a minor title, and she had received a careful education in Andalusia's best convents. Catalina was 23 years old, with hair black as jet, chocolate-colored eyes, and a vivacious intelligence reflected in each of her words. She had come to Nueva Esperanza accompanying her father, who was interested in investing in the agricultural innovations being carried out on the estate. "Is it true that you've managed to double wheat production in 5 years?" she asked Diego during the welcome dinner. "It's true," he confirmed, "although the merit isn't mine alone. My mother designed the crop rotation system. My father perfected storage techniques, and our workers contributed traditional knowledge of the land." You speak of your family as if it were a company," observed Catalina with a smile. "In a way it is, but a company where everyone are partners, not employees." Catalina looked at him with renewed interest. It wasn't common to find a landowner who spoke that way about his workers. During the week the Ruiz de Alarcón visit lasted, Diego and Catalina spent long hours talking. He showed her the estate, explained cultivation methods, took her to see the school where she was impressed by the quality of education Esperanza imparted. "Your mother is extraordinary," she commented one afternoon while they walked through the olive groves. "She speaks 5 languages, knows medicine, agriculture, mathematics. Where did she acquire such education?" Diego hesitated for a moment. His family's story was no longer secret, but he didn't proclaim it to the 4 winds either. "My mother comes from a noble family that valued feminine education," he replied carefully. "Although circumstances led her to a different life from what she would have had by birth." Catalina looked at him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to read between the lines. "And you? Do you also come from different circumstances?" Diego stopped under the shade of a centennial olive tree. "Do you really want to know?" "Only if you want to tell me." Itao. And so, for the second time in his life, Diego related the story of his origins. He spoke to her about his parents' forbidden love, about the decision to build a new life together, about Don Sebastian's threat and his own choice to remain with the family that had raised him. Catalina listened without interrupting, showing neither surprise nor judgment. "And don't you regret it?" she asked when he finished. "Don't you feel curious about the life you could have had?" "Sometimes," admitted Diego. "But then I look around and see everything I have, parents who love me, brothers who respect me, lands that flourish under my care, people who trust me. What more could I ask of life?" "Love," replied Catalina softly. "You could ask for love." Their gazes met, and at that moment, under the olive trees gilded by the afternoon sun, both knew something important was beginning. The courtship was long but intense. Don Fernando Ruiz de Alarcón, Catalina's father, had no objections to the union. Diego owned prosperous lands, had a reputation as an honorable and hard-working man, and although his origin was irregular, his present was solid. "Besides," he confided to his wife, "the girl is in love, and after seeing so many arranged marriages fail, I believe love is a more solid foundation than political alliances." The wedding was celebrated in the estate's chapel in the following spring. It was a simple but moving ceremony, attended not only by family and friends, but also by all the workers of Nueva Esperanza and many inhabitants of nearby towns. Esperanza cried with happiness, seeing her eldest son exchange vows with a woman who clearly adored him. Alejandro, already with completely white hair but still strong and determined, led Diego to the altar with the pride of one who has seen an oak grow from seed. "Are you sure about this, boy?" he whispered just before giving his hand to Catalina's. "As sure as you were when you decided to marry my mother," Diego replied with a smile. "Then there's nothing more to say," murmured Alejandro, giving his blessing. Children came soon to Diego and Catalina's marriage. The first was Rodrigo, a boy with chestnut hair and green eyes who inherited his grandmother Esperanza's intellectual curiosity. Then came the twins, Elena and Esperanza, named in honor of the family matriarch, lively girls who from childhood showed completely opposite personalities. Elena was reflective and studious, while Esperanza was adventurous and determined. The fourth child, Fernando, was born when nobody expected him anymore. He was a peculiar child, with a special sensitivity for animals and plants, who seemed to understand nature's rhythms better than many adults. "This child will be a great farmer," predicted Alejandro, when he saw little Fernando at 3 years old, explaining to his grandfather why a plant looked sad. The estate filled with children's voices, laughter, and the bustle of a new generation, growing up without the shadows of the past that had marked Diego. These children knew from childhood the complete story of their family. They knew about forbidden loves, flights, difficult decisions, but for them, they weren't shameful secrets, but family legends that made them feel proud of their particular lineage. "Grandmother?" little Esperanza asked the family matriarch one afternoon. "Is it true you fled in the night carrying a baby in your womb?" "It's true," replied old Esperanza with a smile. "And do you know why I did it?" "Why?" "Because I wanted that baby to grow up free, without anyone telling him he wasn't good enough because of the circumstances of his birth." "And did it work?" Esperanza looked toward the field, where Diego supervised the harvest alongside his younger brothers, now grown men. Carlos had become an excellent veterinarian. Miguel administered the estate's finances. Alejandra had founded a school for girls in the nearest town, and Isabel, the youngest, was studying medicine in Salamanca. "What do you think?" she asked her granddaughter. The girl followed her gaze and smiled. "I think it worked." The years passed like pages of a well-written book. Alejandro died at 75, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. After a full life in which he had known true love, raised an extraordinary family, and seen the lands he loved so much flourish, his last words were for Esperanza. "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't begged for, it's chosen." Esperanza followed him 5 years later, also in peace, also surrounded by love. She had lived long enough to see her great-grandchildren running through the same fields where she had once fled, seeking refuge. Diego, now become the family patriarch, kept alive the traditions his parents had established. The estate continued being a model of prosperity and social justice. The school expanded until it became a small rural university. The agricultural methods developed at Nueva Esperanza spread throughout Spain and even reached the American colonies. But perhaps the most important legacy wasn't economic or social, but moral. The idea that each person has the right to choose their own destiny, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. 50 years after Esperanza's death, when the marble tombstones in the family cemetery had already been covered with moss and the olive trees planted by Alejandro were centennial giants, a descendant of the family decided to write the complete history of his ancestors. He was Rodrigo Mendoza y Ruiz de Alarcón, Diego's great-grandson, a young historian who had studied at the best universities in Europe and had returned to Nueva Esperanza with the intention of documenting the extraordinary family saga. While reviewing yellowed letters, diaries from the era, and testimonies from descendants of former workers, Rodrigo was reconstructing step by step the story of the Duke's bastard who had fled to raise her child, and the wounded soldier who had chosen love above conventions. "It's incredible," he commented one afternoon to his cousin Elena, Diego's granddaughter, while they organized documents in the family library. "Our whole family, all this prosperity, all this tradition of justice and education, it all began with a woman who had the courage to flee in the night." "Not only that," replied Elena. "It also began with a man who had the courage to love her despite everything, and with a young man who had the courage to choose to stay when he could have left." Rodrigo nodded, contemplating the family portrait hanging above the fireplace. Esperanza, serene and dignified, with her hand resting on Alejandro's shoulder, he, strong and noble, looking directly at the viewer, and surrounding them, their 5 children, each unique but united by bonds stronger than blood. "Do you know what impresses me most about this whole story?" said Rodrigo after a moment of silence. "What?" "That they never pretended to be perfect. They never hid past mistakes or pretended difficult decisions had no consequences. But they converted those mistakes into wisdom and those consequences into strength." Elena smiled. "That's why we're still here, cousin. That's why the estate remains prosperous, why the peasants respect us, why our children grow up knowing they can choose their own path. Because we learned that true nobility doesn't come from surnames or titles, but from how we treat others and the decisions we make when nobody is watching." That night, while finishing writing the last chapter of the family chronicle, Rodrigo stopped before the window overlooking the fields illuminated by the moon. Somewhere in those lands lay buried Esperanza, the Duke's bastard who had chosen freedom above security. Beside her rested Alejandro, the wounded soldier who had chosen love above convenience. Their decisions, made decades ago in desperate circumstances, had taken root and now extended through generations. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren walked through Spain and America, carrying with them the values they had planted, the courage to face adversity, the wisdom to choose love above fear, and the dignity to stand upright no matter what society said. Rodrigo closed his pen and closed the manuscript. The story was complete, but he knew it would never really end. Each new generation would write its own chapter, face its own dilemmas, make its own difficult decisions. But they would always have the example of Esperanza and Alejandro, two wounded souls who found each other at the exact moment, healed each other, and built something beautiful on the ruins of their previous lives. Because that's how the best love stories are. Not those that speak of perfect people living in ideal circumstances, but those that show how true love can flourish even on the most difficult terrain, and how brave decisions made for love can change not only our own lives, but those of entire generations who will come after us. The Duke's bastard had fled to raise her child away from shame, but found something much more valuable. A family built on choice rather than imposition. A love based on respect rather than convenience. A legacy that would endure much longer than any noble title. And in the fields of Extremadura, where the wind still whispers among the centennial olive trees, her story lives on, reminding us that sometimes the most desperate flights take us exactly where we need to be. What did you think of this story of love, courage, and second chances? Did you identify with Esperanza's struggle to build her own life, away from social impositions? Or perhaps you admired Alejandro's nobility in choosing love above conventions? Leave us the word hope in the comments if this story moved you and reminded you that it's never too late to rewrite our destiny. Your comment will help us know that these stories reach the hearts of those who, like us, believe in the transformative power of true love. And if you want to continue enjoying historical romances where the heart defies society's rules, don't miss our other narratives. Each one holds secrets, passions, and decisions that can change entire lives. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey to the past, where we discovered that the deepest feelings know no eras or borders. Until the next story. Who is the lady of the garden? He asked Don Rodrigo that same afternoon. The Duke, with an uncomfortable gesture, replied, "My natural daughter Esperanza. She lives in the palace under my protection." Fernando nodded without showing surprise or disdain. In the following days, he began to seek casual encounters with her. He greeted her in the corridors, coincided with her morning walks, and gradually initiated conversations that prolonged longer than appropriate. Esperanza, accustomed to going unnoticed, felt troubled by that attention. She wasn't naive. She knew nobles usually amused themselves with bastards before fulfilling their matrimonial duties. But in Fernando's gaze, there was something different, a genuine curiosity that disarmed her. "Tell me about the books you read," he told her one afternoon while they walked through the garden's orange trees. "Are you really interested, Count?" she replied cautiously. "If I weren't interested, I wouldn't ask." Esperanza discovered that Fernando not only listened to her, but discussed her ideas with respect, even when they differed. They spoke of Quevedo and Góngora, of the philosophy treatises she secretly read, of her opinions on women's education. He didn't treat her like a salon curiosity or a passing entertainment. The danger arrived when words became complicit silences, when gazes prolonged more than proper, and when, inevitably, they found themselves alone in the library during a July storm. "I shouldn't be here," whispered Esperanza, but her feet didn't move. "Neither should I," replied Fernando, approaching until the lavender perfume she wore mixed with the leather aroma of his gloves. What happened next was what had to happen when two souls recognize each other against all conveniences. They loved each other with the desperation of those who know they're stealing time from destiny, with the intensity of those who understand their love is impossible but can't avoid it. For 2 months they lived a clandestine passion made of secret letters, furtive encounters, and promises both knew unrealizable. Fernando swore to her he would find a way to take her away, that he would defy conventions for her. Esperanza, for the first time in her life, dared to dream of being chosen above everything. But bastards' dreams rarely come true. One September morning, Don Rodrigo summoned Esperanza to his office. His face, always severe, showed a coldness that froze the blood. "It has reached my ears that you have forgotten your place and condition," he said without preamble. "The Count of Monterreal will depart tomorrow to contract marriage with a lady of his rank in Salamanca. And you will remain here, always remembering that a bastard cannot aspire to what is destined for legitimate blood." Esperanza felt the world crumbling beneath her feet. She didn't ask for explanations, didn't cry, didn't plead. Dignity was the only thing nobody could take from her. She made a perfect curtsy and withdrew. That night, Fernando knocked at her window. He had come to say goodbye, to explain he had no choice, that his family had arranged the marriage years ago and he couldn't dishonor his name. "Come with me as my lady's companion," he proposed with moist eyes. "You can't be my wife, but you can be near." Esperanza looked at him with a mixture of love and contempt he would never forget. "I prefer to be a free bastard than a chained beloved," she replied. "Go, Fernando. Fulfill your destiny, and I'll seek mine." 2 weeks later, Esperanza discovered she carried in her womb the fruit of those forbidden loves. Initial panic gave way to iron determination. She wouldn't allow her child to grow up with the mark of shame. He wouldn't be like her, living between two worlds without belonging to either. She stole the jewelry she had inherited from her mother, gathered the money she had saved for years, and one October dawn, fled the ducal palace, carrying with her only the essential: her dignity, her unborn child, and the hope of building a life where love wasn't a crime. The carriage that carried her toward the unknown now crossed the mountains of Sierra Morena, where roads became treacherous and bandits stalked unwary travelers. Esperanza didn't know exactly where she was headed, only that she had to get as far as possible from Andalusia before her father discovered her flight. She had been traveling for 3 days when destiny, capricious as always, decided to change the course of her story once again. The Golden Stag Inn stood at the crossroads of 2 dusty paths like a refuge for lost souls. Its peeling adobe walls and moss-covered tile roof had sheltered for decades travelers, merchants, pilgrims, and fugitives of all kinds. The proprietress, a widowed woman named Remedios, asked no questions of those who arrived with gold to pay and discretion to keep quiet. Esperanza arrived at dusk on the 4th day, when shadows already lengthened among the nearby olive trees and travel fatigue weighed on her shoulders like a lead cape. Her pregnancy, still in the early weeks, didn't show under her travel dress folds, but morning sickness and constant exhaustion had weakened her more than expected. "I need a room," she told Remedios, placing some silver coins on the wooden counter. The innkeeper, a 60-year-old woman with grey hair gathered under a white cap, examined her with shrewd eyes. She had seen enough women fleeing to recognize the signs: scarce luggage, nervous glances backward, the way of keeping shoulders erect despite fear. "The room on the 2nd floor is available at the end of the hallway," she replied, taking the coins. "It includes dinner and breakfast. Are you coming from far, madam?" "Far enough," murmured Esperanza, avoiding details. Remedios nodded understandingly. In her business, curiosity killed faster than diseases. The room was modest but clean: a wrought iron bed, a pine table, a wash basin for cleaning, and a trunk for belongings. The window faced the inner courtyard, where a stone well reflected the night's first stars. Esperanza collapsed on the mattress, and for the first time since her flight, allowed tears to flow freely. What had she done? Where was she headed? How would she raise a child alone in a world that doesn't forgive mothers without husbands? Her crying was interrupted by commotion in the courtyard. Male voices, hurried steps, a horse's nervous neighing. Esperanza looked out the window and saw 3 men unloading another from a mount. Even in the twilight she could see the rider was wounded. His white shirt looked blood-stained, and his body swayed like a drunk's. "Remedios!" shouted one of the men. "We need help. This soldier is badly wounded." The innkeeper appeared with an oil lamp, followed by her daughter Soledad, a 20-year-old with skillful hands for healing wounds. Together they all moved the wounded man inside the inn. From her window, Esperanza managed to see the soldier's face in the lamplight. He was young, perhaps 28 years old, with disheveled chestnut hair and features that, despite the pallor of blood loss, maintained a natural nobility. He wore the blue and gold uniform of Spanish tercios, but it was torn and dirty, as if he had been days in combat. "It's Captain Alejandro Mendoza," she heard one of the men who had brought him say. "He fought in Flanders and was returning to Spain when he was attacked by bandits near Despeñaperros Pass. We found him abandoned on the road." Mendoza? Esperanza felt a chill. Could it be possible he was from her same family? The Mendozas were an extensive lineage, with branches throughout Spain. It could be a coincidence, or it could be destiny playing once again with her life. During the following days, while the captain fought between life and death in a room on the lower floor, Esperanza couldn't help but be interested in his recovery. She went down to the common kitchen for her meals and always asked discreetly about his condition. "He has high fever," reported Soledad, who had become his nurse. "He's delirious and talks in his sleep. He repeats battle names, fallen comrades, and sometimes mentions a woman named Carmen." On the third day, when Esperanza went down for breakfast, she found Remedios seemed worried. "The boy is getting worse," she confessed while serving hot chocolate. "Soledad says the side wound is getting infected, and if he doesn't improve soon—" She didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. In those times, a badly cured infection was a death sentence. "May I see him?" asked Esperanza impulsively. Remedios looked at her with surprise. "Do you know something about medicine, madam?" Not mentally, but during her education at the ducal palace, she had learned about healing herbs and home remedies from the hands of Sister Mercedes, the nun who cared for the family's private infirmary. "Something," she replied. My mother was very versed in the art of healing." Remedios led her to a small room on the ground floor. The air was charged with medicinal herb vapors and the sweetish smell of blood. Alejandro lay on a narrow bed, with his torso uncovered and bandaged. His skin, normally dark, had an ashen tone, and his breathing was labored. Esperanza approached and observed the bandages. They were damp and gave off an odor she recognized immediately: incipient gangrene. "The bandages must be changed immediately," she said with authority. "And I need boiled water, white wine, pure honey, and fresh plantain leaves if you have them." Remedios and her daughter exchanged glances. That mysterious woman's voice sounded like someone accustomed to being obeyed. During the following hours, Esperanza worked with a concentration that surprised even herself. She cleaned the wound with wine, applied pure honey as antiseptic, placed plantain poultices to reduce inflammation, and bandaged everything with boiled cloths. Her hands, accustomed to embroidery and playing harpsichord, proved equally skillful at healing. While working, she had opportunity to better observe the wounded man. He was, without doubt, a man of good family. His hands, though hardened by war, had the elegance of one born to handle a sword, not a hoe. His face, relaxed by unconsciousness, showed a serene nobility that painfully reminded her of her father. When she finished, Alejandro seemed to breathe with less difficulty. Esperanza sat in a chair beside the bed to monitor his evolution, telling Remedios to call her if there was any change. As night fell, the captain's delirium intensified. He spoke of battles in distant lands, of lost companions, of a promise he had to fulfill. At one moment, his eyes opened and fixed on Esperanza's with feverish lucidity. "Are you an angel?" he murmured with a hoarse voice. "Have I died already?" "No," she replied softly, placing a damp cloth on his forehead. You're in an inn, safe. You must rest. I can't die here, he insisted, trying to sit up. I must reach Cordoba. I must deliver a message. Shh. Esperanza calmed him, gently forcing him to lie back down. Now you can't go anywhere. Your body needs to heal. Alejandro looked at her fixedly, as if trying to engrave her features in memory. You have eyes of mercy, he murmured before sinking back into unconsciousness. That night, Esperanza remained watching over him. She didn't know why she was doing it. Perhaps it was just the need to feel useful after so many days of flight and uncertainty. Or perhaps it was something deeper, the maternal instinct already awakening in her, the need to protect a wounded soul as she herself felt wounded. At dawn, when the first sun rays slipped through the fogged window, Alejandro opened his eyes with greater clarity. The fever had begun to subside. "What is your name?" he asked with a weak but lucid voice. Esperanza hesitated a moment. Should she tell the truth? Reveal her identity to a stranger who might know her family? Esperanza, she finally replied, deciding the first name was sufficient. Esperanza, he repeated, as if savoring the syllables. A beautiful name for an angel of mercy. From that day on, Alejandro's recovery was steady. Esperanza continued healing him, not because Remedios asked her to, but because she had found in that task a way to fill the empty hours of waiting. Because, although she wouldn't admit it, she was waiting for her father to stop searching for her, waiting for her pregnancy to be less noticeable, waiting to find the courage to decide what she would do with the rest of her life. Meanwhile, she got to know the captain better. She discovered he was indeed from the Mendoza family, but from a distant branch established in Extremadura. He was the second son of a minor hidalgo who had chosen a military career by vocation and necessity. He had fought in Flanders for 5 years, where he had distinguished himself for his courage and military strategy. "Why were you returning to Spain?" she asked one afternoon while changing his bandages. "My older brother died without descendants," he explained. "Now I'm the heir to the family lands. I must return to take care of them and fulfill other duties." There was something in his tone that suggested those other duties weren't particularly pleasant to him. "Don't you like the idea of inheriting?" she inquired. Alejandro smiled bitterly. "War is terrible, but at least it's honest. A man knows where he stands, who his enemy is, what's expected of him. In the life of landed nobility, everything is more confusing." Esperanza perfectly understood what he meant. She had lived her entire life in that confusion of contradictory roles and expectations. As days passed, their conversations became more intimate. Alejandro told her about war, about lost companions, about cold nights in Flanders trenches where he dreamed of Spain's sun. She spoke to him about books she had read, ideas she had about the world, being careful not to reveal too much about her noble origin. "You are a very cultured woman to be. Forgive me, I don't want to offend you, but your education seems superior to what a woman of my apparent condition should have," she finished with a sad smile. "Appearances deceive, Captain." "Call me Alejandro," he said. "And yes, they certainly deceive. You speak like a court lady, heal like an experienced nun, and have the natural elegance of high nobility. Yet you're here, alone, in a roadside inn. We each carry our secrets," she replied evasively. "True," he nodded, "and I respect yours, as I hope you respect mine." One afternoon, while Alejandro could already get up and walk around the room, a courier arrived at the inn. He was a sweaty and nervous man who brought news from Cordoba. "Is Captain Alejandro Mendoza here?" he asked Remedios. "Who seeks him?" intervened Esperanza, who had come down to help with dinner. "I bring an urgent message from his family." Alejandro came down the stairs, leaning on a cane one of the guests had carved for him. Seeing the messenger, his face darkened. "Tell me," he ordered with military voice. "Your lordship, I regret to inform you that Doña Carmen de Villarreal died last week. The family requires your immediate presence for the funeral and to decide about the future of her properties." Esperanza saw how color completely abandoned Alejandro's face. He gripped the cane to keep from falling. "Carmen is dead?" he murmured, as if he couldn't believe the words. "Yes, sir. A sudden fever. I'm deeply sorry." When the messenger withdrew, Alejandro slowly went up to his room. Esperanza followed him, worried about his reaction. Was she someone special to you?" she asked delicately. Alejandro sat heavily on the bed, head in his hands. "She was my fiancée," he confessed with a broken voice. "My family arranged our engagement before I left for Flanders. Carmen waited for me for 5 years. We were going to marry upon my return." "I'm very sorry," murmured Esperanza, feeling a strange pang in her chest. Was it compassion, or something more complex? "She was a good woman," he continued. "Sweet, obedient, perfect to be an heir's wife. I had learned to esteem her, although I never loved her like in novels." "And now what will you do?" she asked. "Now I'm free," replied Alejandro with bitter laughter. "Free to inherit my brother's lands, free to seek another suitable wife, free to fulfill my destiny as a provincial hidalgo." What irony, right? That night, Esperanza couldn't sleep. Thoughts crowded her mind like frightened birds. Alejandro was free. She was a fugitive bastard, pregnant with another man's child. He was noble, though of minor rank. She had ducal blood, but stained by illegitimacy. Both were alone, both fleeing from destinies imposed by others. Could it be possible that destiny had united them in that inn, lost among roads for something more than chance? The next day, Alejandro announced he would leave in a week for his lands in Extremadura. "And then?" asked Esperanza, surprising herself with the sadness she felt at the idea of his departure. "Then I'll fulfill what's expected of me," he replied with resignation. "I'll administer the lands, seek a convenient wife, have legitimate children, die in my bed surrounded by heirs, a predictable and honorable life. Is that what you want?" Alejandro looked at her for a long time before answering. "I no longer know what I want, Esperanza. War taught me to value life, but society demands I waste it on conventions. You have been the most real thing I've found in a long time. Talking with you, listening to you, seeing the compassion in your eyes, has reminded me I can still feel." "Captain Alejandro," he corrected gently. "And let me tell you something more. I don't know who you really are, what secrets you keep, or why a woman of your quality is alone in a roadside inn. But I know these days at your side have been the happiest I've lived since I returned from war." Esperanza felt her heart accelerate. The words he didn't dare say floated in the air between them like dangerous promises. "Alejandro," she murmured, "there are things about me you don't know, things that would change your opinion." "As there are things about me you don't know either," he replied, approaching. "Esperanza, in war I learned that life is too brief to waste it on pious lies. What I feel for you has nothing to do with your past or your secrets. It has to do with the woman who stands before me now." When their lips met, Esperanza knew her life had just become even more complicated. But for the first time since she had fled the ducal palace, she didn't care.